In a shocking moment that left America stunned, Pastor Joel Osteen publicly criticized Charlie Kirk on live television. His words left the audience speechless, while Attorney General Pam Bondi immediately stood up to counterattack, turning a memorial into an unprecedented confrontation between justice and faith. The debate quickly transcended religion, spilling into honor, power, and hidden truths. What followed cracked the perfect pastor image of Osteen before millions of viewers. This historic broadcast is sparking controversy, tears, and questions across America. Could this be the most shocking moment in U.S. religious television history? The studio lights at Fox News shone directly onto the gleaming glass table, the special program Faith and Power. The legacy of Charlie Kirk had just begun, enveloped in a solemn atmosphere. Today's guests, Pastor Joel Osteen, icon of faith and optimism, facing U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, who had defended Charlie Kirk to his final moments. The audience expected a gentle conversation about legacy, but within seconds, everything shifted. Before the host could ask the first question, Osteen spoke. His voice was low, but his words cut like a knife. Many call Charlie a man of God, but I see a man who used faith to serve himself. The statement landed heavily, thickening the air. Bondi turned, her gaze icy. You're insulting the deceased. Osteen smiled, leaning back in his chair. No, I'm speaking about the truth that arrogance cannot be called faith. The room held its breath. The host tried to interrupt, but Bondi took control. Her voice sharpened. Charlie Kirk inspired millions to believe in God. What right do you have to judge such a soul? Osteen replied instantly, without hesitation. I have a duty to warn when idols are built on blind faith. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Bondi leaned forward. You're not warning. You're slandering. A pastor shouldn't turn someone's death into a sermon to elevate himself. Osteen's smile faltered briefly. He adjusted his mic, his voice lowering. Sometimes you have to say what others won't. Bondi shot back, unflinching. Sometimes you need to stay silent if you don't understand what you're saying. Her response was a decisive blow. The atmosphere heated up as cameras panned slowly across the two opposing faces, one confident, the other ready to fight. The director in the control room signaled to stay on air. The audience sat breathless, feeling like they were watching a trial, not a talk show. Bondi clenched her hands, speaking deliberately. If you want to use God as a tool, today you'll answer to justice. Osteen raised his head, his smile returning, but his eyes wavered. What was meant to be a memorial had become a fierce clash of faith and honor, and within the first few minutes, America knew no one would leave this studio unscathed. The air in the studio thickened after the opening exchange. The host tried to steer the program back on track, but Joel Osteen seized the initiative. He sat upright, hands clasped, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a preacher. We live in an age where faith is misused, he said slowly. Charlie Kirk is a prime example of extremism cloaked in religion. When people believe God is on their side in every argument, they no longer believe in God, they believe in themselves. The audience fell silent. Some nodded, others murmured dissent. The camera lights panned across Osteen's face, capturing a near-arrogant confidence in his every gesture. He continued, as if preaching to the nation, faith isn't about shouting louder than others or turning belief into a political weapon. Charlie Kirk led thousands to believe they could judge in God's name. That's when faith becomes dangerous. Pam Bondi leaned slightly forward, her hand tapping the table. She waited for Osteen to finish, then spoke, her voice calm but weighted with the authority of someone who'd faced countless juries. You're describing a version I don't recognize, she said. Charlie wasn't a preacher. He was a young man who stood up when faith was mocked. He didn't judge in God's name. He refused to bow to those who wanted to erase God from America. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Some clapped lightly, others shook their heads. Osteen looked at Bondi, smiling faintly, as if she'd said something naive. I understand you admire him, he said, but zeal isn't always truth. History is full of people who, under the guise of ideals, sowed hatred. Bondi didn't flinch. And it's also full of people who preached tolerance but stayed silent before lies. The host looked up, about to intervene. but neither stopped. They'd entered an uncontrollable zone, a true battle of wits, no longer a discussion. Osteen stressed that misused religion was the disease of the age, and that Charlie Kirk represented that disease. He spoke with the conviction of someone saving the audience's souls. Meanwhile, Bondi countered point by point, using the language of justice rather than theology. She said Charlie wasn't a prophet, but a citizen who believed in his right to speak about his faith without being labeled. Their words clashed like metal. It became increasingly hard to tell if this was a religious talk or a political debate. Osteen said, "A true man of God doesn't need cameras or slogans." Bondi replied, "And a true man of God doesn't use television to judge others." Her voice was cold, steady, unwavering. Osteen smiled, but the smile now carried a bitter edge. The audience split into two clear camps. One side nodded with Osteen, believing he was warning of the dangers of extreme faith. The other leaned toward Bondi, moved by her defense of the deceased's honor. From the control room, the director signaled cameras to capture every expression. This was no longer a memorial. It was a live drama about faith, power, and loyalty. Osteen shifted his posture, continuing slowly. "Miss Bondi, I understand your emotions, but emotions can't replace truth." Charlie's faith, however sincere, made him a symbol of division. Bondi responded instantly, her voice clear and cold. "No, Pastor, it's the silence of influential people like you that divides America. You don't fight for faith, you protect your image." Her words tore through the air, murmurs erupted. Osteen leaned back, forcing a smile, but his eyes lost their calm. Bondi looked straight into the camera, as if addressing the nation. "Today I'm not defending Charlie Kirk. I'm defending the belief that people can live true to God without being shamed for it." In that moment, the show no longer belonged to the host or the network. Two ideologies, Osteen's mainstream religion and Bondi's steadfast justice, collided irreversibly. And America, from living rooms, churches, and coffee shops, held its breath, witnessing the opening of a morning with no room for neutrality. Pam Bondi didn't let the conversation follow Osteen's lead. As he finished speaking about extremism cloaked in religion, she leaned toward the mic, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Pastor, I have one question. Why did you choose today to publicly criticize Charlie Kirk?" The question was simple, but carried the weight of an indictment. The room fell silent, the audience waiting for Osteen's response. He smiled faintly, glancing at the camera, as if to regain control. "I'm only addressing a phenomenon," he said, "not a person." Bondi narrowed her eyes, unrelenting. "A phenomenon you once praised, correct? In 2020, you called Charlie a young man who dares to believe in light amid darkness. I can have that clip played if you'd like." Osteen froze, his smile briefly stiffening. He crossed his arms, looking down at the glass table. "What I said then reflected a moment's emotion," he said slowly, "but faith, like people, must be tested over time." Bondi cut in. "Or does your faith only exist when there's an audience?" Her voice was calm, but each word struck hard. A soft ooh rose from the audience. The host moved to intervene, but Bondi's gaze silenced him. Osteen took a deep breath, trying to reclaim his preacher's tone. He spoke of the need to test faith, that sometimes God allows people to stumble to understand their true nature. He spoke as if convincing himself more than the audience. But as he looked around, the faces in the studio no longer showed the agreement they once did. They exchanged glances, whispering. A sense of doubt crept into the room like a cold breeze. Bondi leaned back, her voice now lower, as if she'd sized up her opponent. "You're free to change your views, but don't pretend you're speaking for God," she said. "I know because I was there. I saw you hug Charlie after the Dallas service, telling him America needs more young people like him." The studio froze. Osteen looked up, his eyes flashing with caution. "I meet many people," he said, "and I always pray for them, but praying doesn't mean endorsing." Bondi pursed her lips. "No," she said slowly, "but it means you saw good in them. The problem is, today you're denying that, in front of the nation." Her words stripped Osteen of his confidence. He shifted in his seat, arms crossed defensively. "And not denying," he said, his voice hastening. "I'm pointing out that true faith must withstand testing." Bondi didn't let him escape. "Testing? or a chance to prove your own power? The question sliced through the air. Osteen paused for a few seconds, then said, I have no power. I'm just a messenger. Bondi looked at him, her gaze steady and unblinking. What's your message today? That Charlie deserves to be shamed, so others trust your judgment more. For a moment, the studio fell into an uneasy silence. The host leaned forward, about to end the segment, but the director signaled to keep going. The camera zoomed in on Osteen's face, calm on the outside, but his eyes wavered. He tried to restore his pastoral demeanor, speaking of lessons from the fall of those exalted too soon. But his delivery left the audience more confused. Something was off. His voice sounded more like a politician justifying himself than a preacher. Pam Bondi sat still, observing. She didn't interrupt anymore. Her silence made Osteen's words ring hollower. Some audience members began shaking their heads, murmurs rising. As Osteen finished his lengthy talk about the need for humility and faith, Bondi finally spoke. Interesting. You talk about humility, but I haven't heard you admit you could be wrong. Osteen looked up, slightly surprised by her calm tone. But instead of answering, he smiled faintly and said, We all have different ways of learning God's lessons. Bondi tilted her head, replying succinctly, And today, it seems you're in a lesson of your own. The room let out a few soft chuckles, then fell silent. The host glanced at the director, noting the ratings climbing by the minute. But at that moment, the audience's excitement had turned to skepticism. They no longer saw Osteen as a beacon of light, but as a man trying to keep his spotlight from fading. The studio air grew heavy after Bondi's remark. It seems you're in a lesson of your own. Osteen forced a smile, trying to appear in control, but his eyes betrayed him. The host moved to wrap up the exchange, but Bondi wasn't done. She took a deep breath, pulling a thin envelope from her briefcase, holding it firmly as if it were evidence in a trial. Before you continue preaching to the nation about humility, Bondi said, her voice low and resolute, I want to share this. The room fell so silent you could hear the rustle of paper as she opened the envelope. She pulled out a printed copy of a letter, folded neatly in thirds, its edges slightly worn. This is a letter Charlie Kirk sent to you, dated April 18th last year. It's never been made public. Would you like me to read it? Osteen froze. For a moment, his familiar smile vanished. He nodded slightly, about to speak, but Bondi began reading, her words ringing clearly through the mic. Pastor Joel, thank you for our talk the other day. You made me believe that faith isn't a stage, but a lonely road we must walk if we truly want to change the world. I know many criticize me, but you told me not to respond with anger, but to reflect them with kindness. I'll try to live that way. Charlie. When she finished, no one spoke. The room sank into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras. Osteen sat motionless, staring at the glass table. Many in the audience leaned forward, waiting for his response. The host glanced at the director, who signaled don't cut. Bondi folded the paper, her voice softer but no less sharp. You taught him about kindness. You taught him to avoid anger. Yet today you sit here calling him a symbol of arrogance. So who's changed, Pastor? You or him? Osteen inhaled sharply, adjusting his mic, trying to maintain composure. I remember that letter, he said. But Miss Bondi, you need to understand. Those words were the emotions of a young man searching for direction. We can't rely on fleeting emotions to define true faith. Bondi leaned on the table, her gaze unwavering. Fleeting emotions, or a true faith you've now tarnished. A few in the audience began clapping softly, stopping as Osteen turned toward them. He forced a smile, but his voice lost its rhythm. Faith, as I said, must be tested. Charlie was passionate, but he lacked balance. I just want America to learn from that, not to be led by emotions. Pam Bondi shook her head, half regretful, half angry. What you call testing faith is just an excuse to stand above others, she said. People wrote to you, not because they were perfect, but because they needed trust. Charlie trusted you, and you betrayed that. The room's energy sank. Some audience members bowed their heads. Others watched in stunned silence. On the large screen behind, the crew inadvertently displayed an image of Charlie Kirk from a seminar last year, standing center stage, holding a Bible, smiling brightly. The image starkly contrasted Osteen's tone that morning. Osteen glanced at the screen, his eyes wavering, then shook his head slightly. I haven't betrayed anyone, he said, his voice quieter. But I believe if Charlie truly lived in truth, He'd want me to warn others about the mistakes he made. Bondi's head snapped up. You just said Charlie would want you to shame him to enlighten others. Osteen faltered. I didn't say that. But you did, Bondi cut in, her voice thick with indignation. You're using your words to diminish a man who's gone, a man who saw you as a spiritual mentor. The camera zoomed in on Osteen's face, his eyes blinking rapidly, his smile gone. His hand gripped his water glass, so tightly his knuckles whitened. The host looked around, trying to restore balance. Maybe we can take a brief pause. Bondi didn't allow it. No, she said. Let people hear the rest. The studio felt frozen. Osteen stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, his voice trembling slightly, Miss Bondi, I mourn Charlie like everyone else. But when someone is overly exalted, someone has to dare to speak the truth. Bondi tilted her head. Speak the truth, or speak to keep the spotlight on yourself. Her question landed like a final hammer blow. No one spoke further. The host looked down. The cameras stood still. The atmosphere was so heavy the audience dared not clap or breathe loudly. For the first time in the program, Joel Osteen no longer looked like a pastor preaching, but like a man trying to justify himself. As soft music signaled the break, the director signaled to keep the cameras rolling a few seconds longer. The camera zoomed in on Osteen's face. His eyes no longer shone with faith, but with the fear of realizing his years of polished words were now turning to judge him. And the audience, who once placed him on the highest pedestal of faith, began to wonder. Perhaps the one needing to be tested today wasn't Charlie Kirk, but Joel Osteen himself. The studio air thickened after Bondi read Charlie's letter. Osteen sat silent for a long moment, the lights making him look years older. Then he leaned toward the host, whispering something. The host nodded, signaling the crew. On the large screen behind Bondi, a video suddenly played. Before we go further, Osteen said, his voice steady again, but now tinged with coldness. I want the audience to see this. This is Charlie Kirk, the man Miss Bondi calls a torch for a new generation. The video began with Charlie Kirk in a college debate last year. He was speaking loudly, his face tense, his voice sharp, pointing at a group of opposing students. You're all hypocrites, Charlie shouted in the clip. You don't believe in freedom, you believe in control. The footage cut to the audience in the video. Some booed. A female student teared up. When the screen went dark, the Fox studio fell silent. Osteen leaned back, hands clasped, his voice low. That's the faith you're defending, Attorney General. A faith expressed through anger, not kindness. Bondi didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the darkened screen. After a moment, she spoke slowly. You just spoke of teaching kindness, so why are you preaching with deceit? Osteen frowned. What deceit? Bondi signaled a technician, her voice firm and clear. I have the original clip too. A Fox staffer rushed over, handing the host a different USB. Seconds later, the video lit up again, this time longer, unedited. The scene of Charlie Kirk's debate, replayed from the start. He stood in a courtyard, surrounded by dozens of students mocking his faith. One shouted in his face, God isn't real. Charlie stayed silent for a few seconds, then responded with the same sharp voice Osteen had clipped. You're all hypocrites. You don't believe in freedom. You believe in control. In its full context, the meaning reversed entirely. Charlie wasn't the aggressor, but the one responding to insults. His words now rang as a cry to defend his faith, not as arrogance. Bondi looked straight at Osteen. This is the whole truth, and you know it. You chose to show only the part that makes him look like a monster, to protect your own image. Osteen turned to the host, forcing a smile, but his voice cracked. I didn't edit anything. I only showed what the public has already seen. Bondi shot back, cold as steel. You chose what the public should see. That's the difference between a pastor and a manipulator. Her words struck like a dagger to the heart of the conversation. A murmur rippled through the audience, some gasping softly. The host tried to intervene. Perhaps we should take a moment. Bondi raised her hand to stop him. No. We're talking about the truth, and the truth doesn't need a break. No. Osteen's demeanor shifted, his voice rising higher than usual, slightly trembling. You don't understand. You're trying to make me the betrayer just because I dared to say what others fear. Charlie was a good person, but he went too far. I'm warning because I care. Bondi responded without hesitation. Caring doesn't mean slandering others. Osteen lightly slammed the table, the sound jarring through the mic. I have to speak out. If not, we'll all keep worshiping a man instead of God. The room erupted. Some audience members shouted softly, "Let them speak. Respect the dead." The noise drowned out the host. The camera panned across Osteen's face. His eyes reddened, sweat beaded on his forehead. His familiar calm smile was gone, replaced by anger, as if he were losing control of himself. Pam Bondi sat still, hands clasped, her voice low but powerful. "Pastor, you're losing the very thing you preach, calmness. That's not truth, that's fear." Osteen stood from his chair. "You're insulting my faith." Bondi looked up, unmoving. "I'm only reminding you of what you've forgotten. Faith doesn't permit lying to protect oneself." The studio fell into absolute silence. Osteen stood there, breathing heavily, while Bondi remained steady. The host sat frozen, not daring to speak. In that deafening silence, the audience realized this was no longer a mere exchange of ideas. This was a battle of honor between a man once revered as America's preacher and a woman determined not to let faith be exploited. And as Osteen lowered his gaze, no one could tell if he was seeking calm or realizing that his power, built on words, was crumbling live on air. The studio air grew heavy after Osteen's outburst and table slam. The host tried to offer soothing words, but Pam Bondi wouldn't let the storm pass as meaningless anger. She sat still, eyes locked on Osteen, her voice dropping low, eerily calm. "Pastor," she said, "if you're truly speaking for faith, then explain this." She pulled out a thin folder, placing it gently on the table. The sound of paper on glass rang starkly. "This is a list of donations your church received last year. Among them are two organizations, Liberty Forum and Progress Path, both of which ran media campaigns against Charlie Kirk." Osteen blinked. "What are you talking about?" Bondi didn't raise her voice, but each word cut through the air like a blade. "You say you're warning the public out of concern for their souls, but people paid you to say that, didn't they?" A murmur spread quickly through the audience. Osteen leaned back, scoffing, trying to reclaim his usual confidence. "I receive hundreds of donations every year," he said, "from all over the world. You can't claim I'm influenced by anyone just because of a few numbers." Bondi turned the folder, flipping to another page. "Not a few numbers, Pastor. These are specific contracts funding your Faith Over Fire's campaign, timed perfectly with when those organizations began attacking Charlie Kirk in the media." Osteen forced a laugh, but his voice trembled. "I don't know anything about any campaign. I just do my work." Bondi tilted her head, eyes never leaving him. "You don't know, or you don't want to know." A tense silence, taut as a wire, enveloped the room. The host sat mute, hands gripping the script tightly. The camera panned slowly across the audience. Some exchanged looks, others shook their heads. A man in the front row whispered, "If that's true, he's done for." Osteen adjusted his mic, his voice rising.
"More urgent."
"You're attacking me personally. This has nothing to do with faith. It's just political gossip." Bondi replied succinctly, unyielding. "No, this is the truth about your faith, when it's valued in dollars." The room nearly exploded with murmurs. A few began clapping softly, then stopped as the lights swept over. Osteen lowered his head, lips pursed, then looked up, his voice caught between pride and fear. "You don't understand what I've sacrificed to keep this church running, to keep millions believing. No one can do that without financial support." Bondi looked at him for a long moment. "You can take donations to preach, but you can't take money to betray someone who trusted you." Osteen started to speak, but stopped. Words stuck in his throat. The pressure was palpable. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his fingers tapping the table in an anxious rhythm. The image of the ever-confident, smiling pastor was gone. In its place was a man wrestling between defending his reputation and facing the truth. He exhaled softly, speaking almost to himself. "I haven't betrayed anyone. I only did what I thought was right." Bondi didn't interrupt. Her silence was the cruelest response. Osteen continued, clinging to his preacher's tone. "We live in a world where every pastor's action is scrutinized. But if you think I'm lying, show me proof I took money to tear anyone down." Bondi replied instantly, unwavering. "Proof isn't just in papers. It's in timing, words, and attitude. You changed your stance on Charlie right after those donations appeared. You went from a guide to a judge. That's the living proof." Osteen shook his head, but said nothing more. The host's earpiece crackled. "Keep it rolling. This is history in the making." The audience remained quiet, but the looks of admiration were gone, replaced by a mix of pity and disappointment. The man before them was no longer a symbol of kindness, but a figure floundering in fear of losing the spotlight. Osteen bowed his head, hands clasped, trying to regain composure. "I've helped thousands find faith," he said softly. "If today people doubt me over a few papers, maybe they never understood how hard this work is." Bondi replied slowly, no longer sharp, but tinged with sadness. "No one doubts your efforts, Pastor. They doubt your motives. Because true faith doesn't need to be priced in money, and true kindness doesn't need contracts to exist." Once again, the studio sank into silence. The camera lights illuminated Osteen's face, half bright, half shadowed, as if he himself didn't know which side he stood on. In that moment, the debate transcended television. It was no longer a clash between two people, but a raw exposure of a soul confronting itself. The room seemed locked in a prolonged hush after Pam Bondi's final words. No one in the studio dared breathe loudly. Osteen slumped into his chair, hands tightly clasped, his gaze adrift. From the audience, some exchanged confused looks. The host hesitated, about to close the topic of funding, but Bondi wasn't done. She raised her head, her voice now low, not the sharp tone of a prosecutor, but that of someone about to reveal a heavy truth. "There's one more thing, Pastor," she began, "and I hope this time you'll tell the truth." Osteen looked up, his forced smile returning. "I always tell the truth, Miss Bondi. That's my job." "No," she replied. "Your job is to tell stories. Today I want the truth." Her words stirred the room slightly, some leaning forward. Bondi looked directly at him. "In December 2022, you and Charlie Kirk had a private meeting in Houston. That meeting wasn't on your public schedule or documented anywhere. Do you remember it?" Osteen faltered briefly, then chuckled softly. "I meet so many people, Attorney General. I can't recall every private conversation." Bondi leaned toward the mic. "I believe you do, because in that meeting you told Charlie, if you want to be accepted, stay silent about God." The studio gasped. Murmurs swept through the audience, like a wave. The host signaled the director to stop, but the response was clear. "Keep it rolling." Osteen froze. He gave a short laugh, but his voice trembled. "That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. I've never said such words. I've preached for 3 decades about not being ashamed of faith." Bondi slowly opened another folder. "Really? Because I have a witness, someone who was in that room." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. Osteen turned sharply, eyes wide. "You're fabricating. Who are you basing this accusation on?" Bondi looked at him, then out to the audience. "Someone you know well, Father Raymond Keller, who served at Lakewood Church for 12 years. That name made Osteen pale. Sweat beaded on his temples, his voice hoarse. "Father Keller left my church long ago, and he left over personal disagreements, not truth." Bondi remained unfazed. "Maybe, but Father Keller remembers every word you said that day. He recounted that when Charlie expressed his desire to hold faith conferences at universities, you told him, 'Don't bring God into politics. People will destroy you.' And when Charlie said he couldn't separate faith from action, you replied then, 'Stay silent about faith if you want to be accepted.'" Osteen raised his hand, his voice loud. "Lies. I never told anyone to be silent about faith." Bondi, calm, said, "You didn't advise. You ordered." The mic screeched as Osteen slammed his hand on the table. "You're turning this discussion into a trial." Bondi looked at him, unblinking. "No, Pastor. I'm just showing America the gap between what you preach and what you do." The room fell utterly silent. Some bowed their heads. Others exchanged looks, unsure whether to feel pity or anger. The camera lights shone on Osteen, exposing every detail, his lips pressed tight, his smile distorted, his eyes restless. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. "I only told him to be cautious. I know how brutal the media can be. I didn't want Charlie to be crushed." Bondi didn't relent, but you chose to crush him first, with your own words. Her words landed like a final blow. Osteen shook his head, trying to smile but failing. "I cared for him," he whispered. "I only wanted the best for him." Bondi replied, her voice almost sad. "Some advice is given like love, but kills faith. Charlie left that room and told me you made him doubt himself. He asked me, am I wrong for talking about God too much? And today, you're sitting here, doing the same thing." The room let out a collective sigh. Osteen ran a hand over his face, his eyes blinking rapidly, his voice breaking. "I didn't know he said that to you." Bondi nodded slightly. Of course you didn't. Because you never looked back. The host bowed his head, unable to speak. The studio's atmosphere was no longer the thrill of television. It was the weight of a confession taking shape, even as the man in question tried to deny it. Osteen sat silent, no longer raising his hands or arguing. He blinked repeatedly, as if shielding himself from the light, bearing down on him. For the first time since the broadcast began, the audience saw him not as the million-dollar pastor, with an eternal smile, but as a man backed into a corner, afraid of losing others' faith, and lacking the courage to face his own memories. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair, silent. She didn't need to say more. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint whir of the cameras, and in that moment, everyone understood. Joel Osteen had been cornered, not by accusations, but by the past he'd tried to bury. Osteen sat motionless for a long moment after Pam Bondi mentioned the secret 2022 meeting. The studio lights still shone on his face, highlighting the sweat glistening on his forehead. The host hesitated, about to end the exchange, but Osteen raised a hand, signaling to keep the cameras rolling. He forced a smile, his voice softening, trying to reclaim the familiar pastoral image. "I think we're going too far," he said. "I didn't tell Charlie to be silent about his faith. I only wanted to help him avoid the trouble the media could cause. Anyone in my position would do the same. I know how cruel this world can be to young people with strong faith. I just wanted to protect him." His voice softened, almost convincing. Some in the audience nodded, but Bondi wasn't swayed. She clasped her hands, calmly looking at him. "Protect?" she asked. "By attacking him on national television." Osteen held a smile, but his eyes wavered. "I'm not attacking anyone, Attorney General. I'm just saying Charlie chose a difficult path. He caused many to misunderstand faith. I have to help them see that." Bondi shook her head slightly, her voice no longer angry, but cold and deliberate, as if each word had been prepared. "No, Pastor, you're not helping them see that. You want them to see it, to elevate yourself." Murmurs rose from the audience. Bondi opened a second folder, pulling out a few stapled papers. "These are documents from your church's Light of Truth campaign last year. It includes clips, posters, and sermons, using Charlie Kirk's image, the man you now call a symbol of extremism, to draw viewers. You say you wanted to protect him, but you turned his name into a slogan for yourself." Osteen leaned forward, frowning. "My church runs hundreds of campaigns a year. I don't control all the promotional content." Bondi replied instantly. "Strange, because in the project notes, there's your signature."
"You approved it."
The studio air seemed to freeze. The host looked down at his script, his hands trembling slightly. Osteen grimaced, but kept his smile. "If I did sign, I must have believed it was a rightful campaign. I've never used anyone to promote myself. I only share God's message." Bondi looked at him, silent. The lights illuminated Osteen's face, revealing every detail, his lips pressed tight, his smile strained, his eyes flickering restlessly. She let him continue until he began repeating himself. "I only tried to help Charlie. I only wanted to protect faith." Then Bondi interjected softly. "Pastor, do you know why I'm still here? Why I haven't stood up and walked away?" Osteen looked surprised. She continued, slow and clear. "Because I've met people like you. They start with faith, then slowly turn it into a tool. They call it a mission, but it's just ambition. Charlie trusted you, and you turned that trust into advertising." The audience's murmurs grew, no longer whispers but clear discontent. A woman in the front row bowed her head, gripping her husband's hand. A man muttered, "He's losing." Osteen lowered his head, picked up his water glass, trying to steady himself. He took a sip, his voice softer. "I have no ambition beyond spreading love. I may have made mistakes, but I've never done anything for personal gain." Bondi replied gently, not harshly. "Then why did you sign off on that campaign? Why did you let your media team print Charlie's image next to the phrase, 'Faith needs guidance,' with your logo right below?" Osteen didn't answer. He bowed his head, gripping the glass so tightly water spilled over the edge. The room fell into a heavy silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, then 3. People noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he swallowed hard, his eyes wavering. The host regained his voice, trying to shift gears. "Maybe we should pause for a break," but Bondi spoke up. "No, we're closer to the truth than ever." "He doesn't need a break. He needs to answer." Osteen looked up. His smile returned, but it now seemed so forced. It made the audience shudder. "I've already answered," he said, "and I'll keep smiling, because I know my heart is pure." Pam Bondi sat still, nodding slightly. "Yes, you can keep smiling," she replied. But no one in this room believes that smile anymore. The atmosphere settled, heavy as smoke. Osteen held onto that smile, like a mask fused to his face, but the audience could sense it beneath it. He was crumbling, and in that moment, everyone understood. The balance of this battle had tipped decisively toward Pam Bondi. The room was so silent, you could hear the slow whir of the cameras and Osteen's labored breathing. He sat there, clinging to his smile, but his face had paled. Bondi looked at him for a moment, then slowly leaned forward, opening the leather briefcase on the table. Her voice was soft but icy. "One last thing, Pastor. I meant to hold this back, thinking you might come clean, but since you're still choosing silence, I'll let everyone hear your own voice." Osteen looked up, his brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" Bondi didn't answer. She placed a small black device on the table, its red light blinking. "This is an internal recording from a planning meeting for the Light of Truth campaign I mentioned. You know what you said, don't you?" Osteen's patience snapped. "This is a violation of privacy. You have no right. This is the public's right." Bondi cut in, her voice firm as iron. They deserved to hear the truth about the person they trusted. The host moved to intervene, but the director in the control room signaled, "Keep it rolling." The stage lights dimmed slightly, and the room fell into absolute silence. Bondi pressed play. A faint crackle sounded, then a familiar voice rang out. Joel Osteen's, clear and smooth, but this time without the gentle tone he used in public. "We don't need someone like Charlie in our story. He believes in miracles like a child. He's a fool who thinks prayer can change the world. We need a faith that sells, not one that makes people laugh." The sound echoed through the studio. Some audience members covered their mouths. The host sat frozen, unable to look at Osteen. Pam Bondi said nothing, just watched him, her eyes cold and calm. When the recording ended, no one breathed. Osteen blinked slightly, then forced a smile, his voice trembling. That wasn't the whole conversation. It was edited. Bondi remained silent. A technician from the control room relayed through the host's earpiece. "The recording is verified, unedited, original." The host stammered, repeating this on air. The audience gasped, then fell silent. Osteen turned to Bondi, his eyes reddening, his voice breaking. "You're destroying my reputation, just to prove you're right." Bondi replied softly, no need to raise her voice. "No, Pastor, you did that yourself." Her words struck like a blade. Osteen froze, his smile twisting. He reached for his mic, trying to speak but failing. His voice caught, hoarse. "I didn't mean it that way. It was a private meeting. I was just talking about how the media misinterprets miracles." Bondi tilted her head. "Really? Then why did you laugh after saying it, and add that he makes people believe in childish things?" No one in the room moved. The camera zoomed in on Osteen's face, the face that once represented compassion to millions of Americans. Now he looked like an actor whose script had been exposed mid-performance. Osteen lowered his head, trying to compose himself. "I'm tired," he said. "I don't want to turn this memorial into a trial." Bondi didn't relent. "You did that the moment you opened your mouth, calling a dead man arrogant. Today, the people don't need me to accuse you anymore. They've heard your voice." Another wave of silence engulfed the room. From the audience, a woman whispered, "I used to believe in him." Her words were so soft, they barely reached the mic, but they made Osteen flinch. He looked up, scanning the room, as if realizing for the first time that those faces, no longer admiring, no longer trusting, were empty. The light shining on him now felt as cold as a courtroom's. The host clutched his script, trying to wrap up. "Perhaps we should." Bondi placed her hand on the table, resolute. "No, the people deserve to hear him speak clearly." "Pastor, do you believe what you said in that recording?" Osteen sat up straight, breathing heavily. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. "I believe in miracles," he said softly, "but not everyone deserves them." Bondi leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper that echoed through the studio. "Maybe you're right, because miracles don't happen to those who've forgotten who they once prayed for." Her words closed the exchange. Osteen leaned back, his hands trembling on the glass table. In the glaring studio lights, his final forced smile faded, leaving only a raw, confused, frightened, and lonely man. All of America was watching live, and in that moment, Joel Osteen's perfect pastor image collapsed. Not because of enemies or the media, but because of his own voice. Osteen sat motionless after the recording ended, The studio lights cast sharp lines on his face, highlighting the creases around his mouth where his familiar smile once reigned, now empty and heavy. He swallowed hard, still clutching the empty water glass, and his voice was hoarse, trembling slightly. I said that in a moment of frustration. I didn't mean to insult Charlie. No one responded. Only the faint hum of the audio equipment remained. Osteen tried to smile, but it wavered, distorted. I told the media team we had to be careful about how we talk about miracles. That comment, it was taken out of context. Bondi said nothing. She sat upright, her eyes cold, gazing at him as if through thick glass. Her look held no malice, only the stark truth, needing no further words. The more Osteen spoke, the quieter the room grew. The silence was no longer curiosity or tension. It was disappointment spreading like smoke. He took a deep breath, trying to reclaim his preacher's demeanor. I'm human. I say the wrong things sometimes. I get heated, but I loved Charlie. I truly cared for him. I just wanted people to understand that faith isn't cheap miracles. It needs to be preserved. His voice trembled, breaking at the end. Osteen bowed his head, eyes blinking rapidly, then looked up, trying to face the camera. I know millions are watching. I don't want them to think I'm a hypocrite. I'm just a man trying to share what's good. Bondi didn't respond. Her silence became the strongest accusation. Some audience members lowered their heads. A man shook his head, muttering, "He should stop." Osteen continued, his voice faltering, as if he no longer believed his own words. "If I offended anyone, I'm sorry, but don't let a moment of anger erase my entire life." He placed a hand on his chest, his eyes pleading. "I've spent my life talking about faith, love, forgiveness." Charlie knew that. He understood me. Bondi looked up, responding slowly, her voice not loud but resounding in the quiet room. "If Charlie were alive, he might not recognize you today." Her words stopped, Osteen cold. He looked at her, lips parting but speechless. The confidence that was once his trademark lay in fragments. He turned away, staring into the void before him, where the white light burned painfully. The host glanced at the director, awaiting a signal to end, but the director signaled to keep going. They knew they were witnessing history, the fall of a man once untouchable. Osteen gripped his hands tightly, trembling. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "I stand before millions every week. I can't always be perfect." Bondi tilted her head, her gaze softening, but without mercy. "No one expects you to be perfect, Pastor. They just expect you to be honest." Osteen sat silent, his eyes glistened, whether from tears or the harsh lights. He shook his head lightly, as if trying to dispel something, then whispered, almost to himself, "I don't know what else to say." Bondi replied with a single sentence, "Sometimes silence is the rightest thing you can do." The air thickened. The host looked down. The cameras shifted to a wide shot. The entire room was silent. No more murmurs, no racing pulse of live television. Everyone felt they were witnessing something rare, a moment when a powerful man was laid bare, not by rage, but by his own weakness. Osteen leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. He no longer tried to smile or defend himself. Something in him seemed broken. The camera panned slowly to his face, half in shadow, half in light, a face that once stood for faith, now only showed a man lost. Pam Bondi said no more. She just looked at him, long enough to make the audience hold their breath. In the final moment, Osteen let go of his hands, whispering, unclear to whom, "God, what have I done?" No one answered. The director finally signaled to cut, but the image lingered for a few seconds. A solitary man under blazing lights, his smile gone, his faith shattered. In the studio, everyone understood that Joel Osteen had fallen, not from attacks, but from the words that once lifted him to the top. No one in the studio moved after Joel Osteen's final whisper. No music, no technical cues, just the white light quietly enveloping the two figures facing each other. The host looked down at the crumpled script in his hands, unable to read another line. The director in the control room didn't signal to cut. They all knew any sound now would shatter the moment the nation was watching, with bated breath. Pam Bondi took a deep breath, then slowly stood. The soft scrape of her chair echoed, seemingly trivial but making millions watching at home look up. She stood there for a few seconds, her eyes still on Osteen, a man now a shadow of himself, sitting motionless, hands limp, eyes vacant, staring into the emptiness before him. No confidence, no aura, only the quiet unraveling of a man who'd lost the most precious thing, the trust of others. Bondi brought the mic closer. Her voice was soft, but clear, resonating in the silent room. We've talked too much about faith, about God, about justice, but today, I think what America needs to hear isn't sermons or excuses. It's two simple things, honor and honesty. She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience. Honor isn't in how many cheer for you. It's in how you act when no one believes in you anymore. And honesty isn't in words, but in what remains when all words are tested. A wave of silence washed over. Those in the front row bowed their heads, some wiping tears. Bondi continued, her voice growing softer, as if speaking only to Osteen. No one's perfect, Pastor, but what keeps a person standing isn't a smile. It's the ability to face their own mistakes. Osteen didn't move. He sat there, eyes wide, lips trembling but silent. The camera zoomed in slowly on his face. A flicker of regret, a flicker of fear, then emptiness. The lights shone down, casting his shadow onto the glass table. A blurred, unsteady image, as if the light itself no longer wanted to touch him. Pam Bondi lowered her head slightly. "I'll stop here," she said, "because what needed to be said, the people have heard enough." She turned to the host, her voice gentle. "Thank you for giving me the chance to speak for those who can't." The host nodded, unable to speak. Half the audience stood, silent. No applause, just quiet respect. The cameras panned across their faces, not excited, not angry, but a complex mix of regret and awakening. Bondi walked slowly to the edge of the stage, pausing before leaving the frame. She turned back, looking at Osteen one last time. "Pastor," she said, "I hope one day you'll remember why you once believed, not to reclaim your reputation, but to reclaim your soul." Osteen looked up slowly. His eyes were clouded, like someone waking from a long dream. He scanned the room, seeing dozens of cameras, hundreds of people watching, but he was no longer the pastor, the speaker, or the public figure. He was just a lonely man, sitting in the harsh light, where every outer layer had been stripped away. The host finally spoke, his voice trembling. "We will end this special broadcast here," but no one left their seats. The studio felt frozen in silence. A strange moment. No ads, no closing music. Only one image dominated the screen. Osteen with his head bowed, hands trembling on the table, while behind him, Bondi turned and walked out of the light. A young director in the control room whispered to a colleague, "Don't cut yet. This is a moment people will remember forever." And they kept the feed running for 40 more seconds. 40 perfect seconds of silence, where viewers at home didn't dare change the channel or speak, just watching the man crumbling under the lights. When the signal finally cut, the host exhaled, leaving his chair. The crew moved slowly, no one speaking loudly. Some bowed their heads to Bondi as she passed, her face still calm but her eyes red-rimmed. Osteen remained in his seat, as if unaware the show had ended. No applause, no farewells. Only one truth stood clear that moment of silence, when a man ran out of defenses and a woman chose silence to end it, became the symbol of the broadcast. A symbol no one expected, but would haunt America for years. The moment of false faith collapsed, and honesty was finally heard in the silence itself. The studio lights dimmed, leaving only faint golden streaks lingering on the ceiling. When the final cut sounded from the control room, the crew still didn't speak. The air after the broadcast remained thick, like smoke after an explosion. Joel Osteen sat still for a few seconds, then quietly stood. He didn't look at anyone, didn't shake hands, didn't offer his usual thanks. A young staffer tried to speak. "Pastor, your car is waiting." But Osteen only nodded slightly, walking away, his shadow long on the lit floor. No one escorted him. No one took photos. His footsteps echoed in the narrow hallway, slow and heavy. He passed a large poster of himself, smiling under the words, "The Power of Faith." In that moment, Osteen paused. He looked at the image for a long time. The man in the poster still perfect, eyes bright, smile unwavering, while the real man was a faint shadow behind glass. He touched the poster lightly, then turned away. No one recognized the $1 million pastor leaving the studio, only a man quietly walking through the darkened lights. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stayed in the studio. The host turned to her, his voice low. "I've never seen anything like this. You know, we should have cut the feed 10 minutes ago, but the director said to keep it. Do you think you did the right thing? Bondi didn't answer immediately. She removed her mic, set it on the table, her eyes following the door. Osteen had exited. There's no right or wrong, she said slowly. I just knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I've heard those kinds of words my whole career. People on high platforms preaching morality, then exploiting others' trust. If I didn't speak today, I'd be no different from them. The host nodded slightly. But do you regret it? He practically fell apart right in front of you. Bondi turned, a tired smile flickering. I don't regret it, but I'm not happy either. This isn't a victory. When the truth is spoken, it doesn't bring joy, only emptiness. Because I know, even if he was wrong, a part of America that believed in him will hurt too. She stood, adjusting her coat. The backstage camera kept rolling, capturing Bondi walking across the empty stage. The mic cords dangled. Chairs were askew. A water glass tipped over on the table, all remnants of a battle. As she reached the stage's edge, the host called after her. Do you think you'll come back? Bondi paused, looking back into the darkness, where Osteen had vanished. No one comes back after hitting rock bottom in faith, she said softly. They just learn to live with the emptiness left behind. She walked on. The sound of her heels echoed steadily on the floor, mingling with the clatter of the crew cleaning up. A young technician approached, voice trembling. Thank you, Attorney General. You spoke for so many. Bondi only smiled, saying nothing. She appreciated the words, but inside, there was only an indescribable emptiness, like someone who'd won a case too heavy to feel satisfied. Outside, the night sky blanketed the city. A black car waited to whisk Bondi away from the television studio. As the car rolled forward, Bondi glanced through the window, catching sight of Osteen hurrying toward another parking lot in the distance, his coat fluttering lightly in the wind. Two people heading in opposite directions, each carrying a different kind of silence, one of exposure, the other of aftermath. The host remained in the studio, whispering to the director. She didn't need to raise her voice, but when she stood up, the whole country heard her. The director didn't respond. He stared at the monitor, replaying the final moments. Osteen with his head bowed, Bondi standing, the lights casting a streak that seemed to divide two worlds. One world of fading glory collapsing, and another, raw, imperfect, where truth had just reclaimed its voice. That night, as everyone left, the studio floor still carried the hot scent of lights and the lingering breath of a confrontation yet to dissipate. There was no victor. There was no loser. Only a heavy feeling hung in the air, the feeling of justice spoken, but at the cost of a fracture that could never be mended. Two worlds had collided during those broadcast hours, and now they parted forever. Faith and justice, each bearing invisible wounds. That night, the hotel where Joel Osteen was temporarily staying stood quiet in downtown Houston. After the broadcast, he didn't return to Lakewood Church as usual. The press swarmed the area, and he lacked the courage to face the faces that once saw him as a guide. In the darkened room, the only light came from the TV screen, replaying the morning's broadcast. Osteen sat on the edge of the bed, eyes shadowed, face gaunt. Bondi's words echoed in his mind, each one like a nail driven into his memory. You call it protecting, but you betrayed him. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an email with no sender, no subject, only an attachment. His heart pounded. For a few seconds, Osteen hesitated. He had a feeling he was about to open something he couldn't undo. Then he tapped the download icon. The screen showed a blurry image, filmed on a phone from a low angle. Osteen recognized the room instantly, a small office behind Lakewood Church. He saw himself, younger, sitting across from Charlie Kirk. Both were smiling, the atmosphere warm. It was 2022, months after their Dallas meeting. Osteen remembered that conversation vividly, but didn't recall anyone recording it. A faint sound played. Charlie was speaking, his voice full of passion. I just want people to know believing in God isn't something to be ashamed of, Pastor. They call me extreme, but I'm just trying to hold on to what I believe. Osteen in the video smiled faintly, his voice low and calm. Charlie, this world isn't kind to those who talk about God too much. They'll make you a symbol, then destroy you for it. Charlie shook his head, his eyes blazing. Then let them. I only ask one thing. If that happens, please don't let them turn me into a symbol. I don't want to be an idol or a victim. I just want people to remember I was sincere. Osteen felt his heart tighten. He remembered that dialogue clearly, but hearing it now, Charlie's words rang like a judgment bell. In the video, he only smiled, placed a hand on Charlie's shoulder, and said something he thought was advice at the time. Sometimes silence is the best way to keep faith pure. The footage stopped there. The image blurred, then faded. Osteen sat motionless, his hands trembling. Cold sweat beaded on the back of his neck. Charlie's plea, "Don't let them turn me into a symbol," repeated in his mind 100 times. And he realized, he himself, with his harsh words on live television, had done the exact opposite. He had turned Charlie into a symbol, not of faith, but of pain and division. He buried his head in his hands. Charlie's face from the video kept flashing before him, young, eyes bright and sincere. Back then, Osteen had seen in the young man a piece of his own youth, the desire to believe, to lead, to be protected. And now, with everything shattered, he saw himself as no different from those Charlie had warned against, people who used faith to build a pedestal for themselves. A gust of wind rattled the window. Lifting the curtain, Osteen looked up, the streetlights outside, casting light on his face. For the first time in years, he didn't try to pray, didn't search for excuses, didn't say, "Lord, forgive me." He just sat there, letting the silence swallow every voice in his head. Outside, church bells tolled in the night, steady, somber. He walked to the window, looking toward Lakewood, where lights still glowed faintly. He wondered how many who had heard him preach about forgiveness would now forgive him. A strange feeling rose within him, guilt mingled with liberation. His phone buzzed again. A text appeared from an unknown number. You forgot what he said, but God didn't. Osteen gripped the phone, tears streaming down. He sank onto the bed, head bowed low. This time, no audience, no cameras, no excuses could save him from himself. Guilt overwhelmed him, heavy enough to choke. He thought of the services, the smiles, the sermons, the times he said, "God is within us," to mask his fear of losing human adoration. Now that adoration was gone, leaving only the real man, weak, weary, empty. He closed his eyes. The final image in his mind wasn't the stage or the camera lights, but Charlie Kirk's eyes, bright, trusting, forgiving. "Don't let them turn me into a symbol," he had said. And now Joel Osteen understood. That plea wasn't just for Charlie's sake, but a warning to him, a man who had forgotten that faith isn't for display, but must be held by truth, even if it costs everything. That night, in the darkened room, Pastor Joel Osteen sat silent until dawn broke. The morning light fell on his trembling hands. No more sermons, no more crowds, just the raw truth, finally finding its way back to him. The next morning, Houston's sky was gray, drizzling. Joel Osteen sat in his car for hours, an old phone on the seat beside him. He had meant to call Pam Bondi since dawn, but his hands shook every time he looked at her number. Since the night before, the video of him and Charlie Kirk haunted his mind like an unrelenting judgment. Finally, at 8:47, he took a deep breath and pressed call. Bondi's voice came through, hoarse but calm. "Hello." Osteen hesitated. "It's Joel Osteen." A long silence stretched across the line. Then Bondi replied, "I know. Can we meet privately?" he said, his voice low, weaker than ever. Another pause. He heard a faint breath on the other end. Finally, Bondi said, "Yes, but not to talk about the media or the broadcast, only about the truth." 2 hours later, they met in a small room behind an old church on the outskirts. No press, no cameras, no intermediaries. Just two people who had faced off on live television, now sitting a few steps apart in the dim golden light of a wooden room. Osteen looked different, rumpled shirt, sunken eyes, exhaustion in every movement. Bondi remained composed, her eyes sharp but heavy with weight. Osteen began, his voice hoarse, halting, as if each word was heavier than he expected. "I didn't call you to make excuses. I need to say what I should have said long ago." Bondi nodded slightly, not interrupting. "I've preached thousands of sermons about faith," he continued, "about kindness, about truth. But I don't remember the last time I truly believed in those things. I don't know when I started speaking to be heard, instead of to help someone find light." He bowed his head, hands clenched. "When Charlie came to me, I saw in him a faith so pure it scared me. I told him to be silent, not to protect him, but because I was jealous. I was afraid people would believe in him more than in me. Bondi didn't move. Osteen's words hung in the air, heavy. He took a deep breath, his eyes blurring. I lost the true purpose of faith. I preached humility while seeking praise. I spoke of forgiveness, but couldn't forgive myself. I became the very thing I warned others to avoid. Bondi spoke slowly, her voice low but not cold. You're not the first to be consumed by the light you created, but few dare to admit it. Osteen looked up, his eyes pleading. I don't know how to start over. After the broadcast ended, it felt like the whole world went silent before me. I've lost everything, not just my reputation, but my own faith. Bondi nodded slightly, her voice softening. The truth never comes easy, Pastor. It always brings pain. Those who speak it are hated, and those who live in lies are torn apart when they touch it. But if you truly want to redeem what's lost, let the truth hurt you. Only through pain do people begin to believe again. Osteen sat silent. He looked at her for a long time, then said, I don't think I have the strength to believe anymore. Bondi gave a faint smile, tinged with sadness. No one does. People choose to believe because if they don't, they'll die in the dark. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing more. The rain outside fell steadily, pattering on the old wooden roof, blending with the heavy air of the room. Osteen wiped a bead of cold sweat from his forehead, then whispered, I used to think faith was light, but now I see it can also be fire. If you're not careful, it burns everything. Bondi nodded slightly. That fire is only dangerous when you use it to shine on others instead of yourself. A tired smile flickered on Osteen's lips. Maybe you're right, he said. I thought God chose me to speak for him, but now I just wish I could be silent and listen for once. She looked at him, her gaze softening, no longer that of an adversary, but of someone who understood. Maybe this is the moment you're meant to listen, she said. Not to the world, but to the God you forgot. Osteen bowed his head. A tear fell onto the wooden table between them, silent as an unspoken sob. They sat a few minutes more. Then Bondi stood. She didn't offer her hand, just looked at him and said softly, We've both fought too long, Pastor. Sometimes, salvation doesn't come from winning or losing, but from stopping. Osteen looked up, nodding slightly. Thank you, he said, not for forgiving me, but for not hating me. Bondi gave a sad smile. I don't have room to hate anyone anymore, only room for exhaustion. She walked to the door. Osteen didn't watch her go, just sat still, listening to the door close behind her. In the room, the smell of damp wood and the sound of rain blended into a mournful melody. No more justice, no more hatred, just two people drained by their ideals, each carrying their own wounds. As Bondi left, Osteen remained seated, eyes closed. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the air crisp. Far off, a small church appeared through the trees. Its bells rang at that moment, 3 long tolls, echoing in the wind. Osteen stood there for a long time, clutching his Bible, saying nothing. At the same time, in Dallas, the memorial ended. Bondi stepped down from the podium. People approached to shake her hand, many in tears. She only nodded, saying softly, Thank you, but don't glorify anyone. Hold on to your faith. That's enough. As she left the church, the sun rose, its light streaming through the stained glass windows, casting long streaks like tears on the walls. Outside, hundreds stood silently, none leaving. A young student, holding a candle, whispered, I never believed in religion, but today, I understand faith isn't something others teach. It's something you hold on to yourself. Pam Bondi smiled, saying nothing. She knew Charlie's words, and the costly lesson from Osteen had touched more hearts than any sermon ever could. As the memorial ended, the wind carried the final toll of the church bells across the plaza. No one shouted, no slogans, just thousands standing still, hands on their chests, as if asking themselves, what do I believe in? Across America, the memorial was replayed on national television. The scene of Bondi reading Charlie's final letter spread across the internet, millions watching without commenting or arguing. They just stayed silent. That evening, Fox aired the memorial's closing moments. No commentary, no music. The final image was light streaming through the church's windows, illuminating the empty seat where Osteen should have been. A caption appeared. True faith doesn't need an audience, only honesty. The screen faded to black, and America, noisy, divided, weary, in that rare moment, fell silent. No one spoke, No one judged. They just stared at the empty space on the screen, where a final question lingered, echoing like a reminder for an era who is truly speaking in God's name. The story Joel Osteen shocks America with truth about Charlie Kirk. Pam Bondi destroys him on live TV. Is not just a personal tragedy between two powerful figures, but a profound mirror reflecting how America views faith, honor, and truth in an era dominated by media. The image of Joel Osteen, a pastor once admired by millions, collapsing on live television after a recording of him calling Charlie a fool who believes in miracles was aired publicly, is not just a moral shock. It's a warning about the danger of turning faith into a tool for power. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi, not a priest or evangelist, became the voice of righteousness, asserting that true faith doesn't need an audience, only honesty. Their confrontation transcended a political debate, becoming an exposure of sincerity versus hypocrisy dressed up in the spotlight's glow. Especially poignant was Charlie's plea to Osteen, "Don't let them turn me into a symbol," only for Osteen to do the opposite, revealing the timeless tragedy of modern American society, where people often lose sight of faith's essence when blinded by power and fame. The lesson for America's people and leaders is clear. Faith and civic virtue cannot be bought with image, and justice cannot be protected by silence. The public must have the courage to question those who claim to speak for God. Leaders, whether religious or political, must remember that honesty, not power, is the true foundation of the faith America was built upon. If you believe truth and honesty still have a place in today's America, subscribe to our channel to join us in continuing the journey to reclaim the light of true faith. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next video, where we explore stories that make America ask, who is truly speaking in God's name?